Good morning, church family. A number of years ago, I went to a Texas Rangers baseball game with some friends of mine. We had a good time, but the game wasn't all that good. The Rangers weren't playing very well, and in fact, were never ahead the entire game. We got to the ninth inning, and the Rangers were down by several runs, and we decided to just go ahead and start making our way to the car so we could avoid all the traffic that would probably be right after the game. And so as we were walking out of the stadium, suddenly we hear the crowd cheer. We're like, I wonder what happened. But we kept walking and got about halfway to the car, and the crowd cheered again. And this time the cheer went on, and in fact, the crowd just went nuts. And we're like, oh man, what just happened? And we got to the car and turned on the radio to tune into the game to see what happened. And as you might have already guessed, we walked out just before a Rangers ninth inning rally where they came back and actually ended up winning the game there in the last few minutes of the game. We thought the game was over, and so we left, but even though we thought it was over, the game was not over. The best part was still left to come. Last week on Easter Sunday, we talked about Jesus going to the cross and ultimately emerging in victory from the grave in the resurrection. And we said that those people who conspired to send Jesus to the cross to try to get rid of him when he was executed that day, they thought they won. They thought it was over. And on the other side, those disciples of Jesus who ran away and abandoned him when he was arrested, they thought it was over too. They were scared and didn't know what to do. They thought they had made a huge mistake and it was over. And yet on that third day, Jesus showed them all that it was not over, that the forces of evil had not won, and that he was alive. That although they thought it was over, the best part was still to come. It happens time and again that the forces of evil think that they can stop God's plan. And they may think that they have stopped God's plan. They think that they can put an end to God's people, to God's movement in this world. And yet the forces of evil find out over and over as God shows himself to be unstoppable. His plans cannot be thwarted. He will not be stopped. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus took his disciples off out of town to a place where he could have a conversation with them. And he asked them, who do people say that I am? And ultimately, who do you say that I am? And it's when Peter makes his great confession saying, you are the Christ. And Jesus responds to Peter in Matthew 16:18, saying, I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Look at this. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Jesus, in talking about the church that was to come, and the first things that he says about the church is that it will be unstoppable. That this is a movement of God, that the forces of evil, the gates of hell itself will not be able to stop. Today we are starting a new series called Unstoppable. It's a study of the book of Acts, a study of the story of the spread of God's unstoppable church, carrying out his unstoppable mission in this world. We're going to see how this story unfolds as the gospel spreads all over the world. And we'll see how this is the story that you and I are still a part of today. We are still living out what was started in this story that we're going to examine in this series. So a couple of months after the resurrection, Jesus had his followers get together in Jerusalem, and he met them there for one last conversation before he would leave. These would be the last words that he would share with them before he ascended to heaven. And so they all come together, and this is what happens in Acts chapter 1, verse 6. When they had come together, they asked him, "Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?" This is the question that they have burning in their hearts, and it's on their minds. A lot of times we see them ask this question, and we kind of give them a hard time for asking this. Like, you guys still don't get it? This is not what's happening here. This is a spiritual kingdom that he's setting up, not an earthly kingdom. Why don't you get it? And I've talked of it that way before too. But as I've thought about it, when we think about what they've actually been through and what they've actually seen, this question makes a lot of sense. When you think about what they've been through, they thought it was over. They thought that the mission that they had been a part of was over when Jesus went to the cross. They had followed him everywhere, believing that he was probably the Messiah, and they wanted to be his followers. They wanted to do as he taught them to do, but when he went to the cross, it was over. And then he came back. The resurrection proved to them beyond a shadow of a doubt that he really was the Messiah, that he really was the one that they had been waiting for a long, long time. He really was God's anointed one. He really was the king that was intended to reign over all things. And so when we understand that this is on their hearts, they are excited that it's been proven that he is the king, he is the Messiah. We see what's at the core of this question that they ask. At the core of their question is a desire that we also share. Knowing that he is the king, God's people long to see their king reign and for his rule to restore peace. God's people long for their king to reign, to see him on the throne, to see what results from his rule, to see the peace that ultimately comes from the reign of the one true righteous king. The standard greeting for the Jewish people was the Hebrew word shalom. And shalom was more than just a friendly greeting, more than just pleasantries. It was an expression of their hope for the world. Because shalom, that means peace, is more than just an absence of conflict. It is the world working the way that it's supposed to, with God reigning at the top, with people loyal to him, and creation functioning in the way it was designed to function, in perfect harmony. That is shalom. And every time they say that word, it's an expression of that desire for the world to be made right. To see amidst all this chaos that God has promised to bring order, to bring shalom, to bring peace. And it ultimately comes through the reign of the Messiah. And so when they understand that Jesus is the Messiah, they're like ready for that reign to come, ready for that shalom to break out all over the world. And this is what they're asking for. There's a passage in Isaiah 45, verse 23. It says, "By myself I have sworn, my mouth has uttered in all integrity a word that will not be revoked. Before me every knee will bow. By me every tongue will swear." These are the words of God expressing that there is a day that is coming when everyone will recognize him as king. Paul makes reference to this passage a couple of times in his writings, and he points it towards Jesus, that someday there is a time coming when every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord, and they will swear allegiance to him. See, Jesus' followers know that this is the outcome of the reign of the Messiah, and they long to see it. And they've already been through all of this. They've seen Jesus go to the cross. They've seen the resurrection. They know he's the Messiah. And so on their minds, they're wondering, like, what else could be next? I mean, now must be the time when he is going to reign over all things. What else could there be? And really, don't you long for this too? Don't you long for the day when every knee will bow? Don't you long for your King to reign and for his rule to bring peace, to put an end to all the violence, to all the crime in this world, to put an end to the injustice and the prejudice that is throughout our world, to put an end to all disease and all famine, to put an end to economic concerns, to put an end to all those things that give us anxiety and fear and allow us to live in shalom. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 8, the Hebrew writer says, "Now in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him." This is sort of an acknowledgement of the reality that God puts things under his authority, and yet we don't always get to see it just yet. We don't see everything in subjection to him, but we are ready to see. We long to see. And so maybe the question is, how long? How long until we get to see those results? If you have kids, you know that question, how long, pretty well. There's no road trip that you can go on without the kids asking at some point, how much longer? Are we almost there yet? My kids ask how long in many ways all the time. And quite often they ask, now? With a question mark. Usually it's about something small, like they've been told they can have a piece of candy at some point in the day after they do a few things, and they're like, now can I have it? Or they can play a game on the TV or on the computer, and they say, well, now can I? Is it time yet? And maybe it's not just a kid thing. Maybe we just express it in different ways. Maybe we still wonder, how long? Is it time yet? Is it time to come out of this quarantine yet? When can I start to do some of those things I like to do again? How much longer? Are we almost there? Ultimately, that's the question that Jesus' disciples ask him on that day, right before the ascension. Are we there yet? Is it time for your reign to change the world? And they ask him to go back to it. Will you at this time restore the kingdom of Israel? And Jesus' response to them is interesting. Jesus' response to them is not to chastise them for not getting it. He doesn't get on to them that they don't understand what's going on here. Instead, Jesus says this. He says, "It is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority." He doesn't chastise them for not getting it. He says it's not for you to know the timing. As if they have just asked, how much longer? And notice what he says. When he says it's not for you to know, he doesn't say no one knows. He doesn't say, well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I don't know, He says it's not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, which seems to indicate that there are times and seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. This is good news. It is good news that it is not our responsibility to know, but that the Father has fixed some things in time and in seasons. It is good news to know that it's not dependent on my ability to figure it out. It's not dependent on my ability to plan things perfectly. Our role as Jesus followers is not to know when he's going to do things, but to know who is doing them. To know by faith that it is God who is behind the scenes, that it is God who is in control, and ultimately to trust that God's timing is perfect. And every season is under his authority. God's timing is perfect, and every season that you and I experience in life and that our world experiences through history is under his authority. There is peace to be found in embracing that. There is a deep and abiding peace that can come when we learn to let go of our need to be in control, our need to know everything, and trust that the one who sees everything throughout all time and space is in control and has worked out the exact right time to do everything that he plans to do. And so I say there's some peace in embracing that, but I also admit that sometimes it's a little hard to embrace that. Because we like to feel like we are in control. We like to know what's going on. I know for myself, when something is going on, I like to know what the plan is. I want, if I'm going on a trip, I want to know what the plan is, what we're going to do while we're there, or at least some possibilities. I want to have some ideas about the possibilities so that I can have a plan and a contingency plan. I like to know what's going on. And when there are unknowns, like when I'm just not sure how long something is going to go on or when something's going to happen or what it's going to be like, when there's too many unknowns, it really can kind of weigh on me. Maybe you're like that too. And that really makes times like this, this season that we're experiencing right now, a bit challenging. Because every day I'm just wanting to know how much longer. When can I start to do some of those things I like to do? When can I go to the grocery store just like normal? When can I go to a restaurant with my family just like normal? When can we get together as a church family just like we enjoy doing and encourage one another? It's hard sometimes to let go of that need to know, but what I'm finding is that times like this that are challenging in that way, they can be really powerful for training. They can be really powerful for training our hearts. It can really be the time where we grow in our faith because we're having to deal with unknowns and we just have to live through it. And so we have to rely on something besides our ability to know. We have to learn to let go of our need to feel in control. We have to start accepting that feeling of not knowing. We have to start learning how to be patient. Psalm 27, verse 14 says, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." Wait for the Lord. And notice that being strong and letting your heart take courage comes not from knowing, it comes from waiting and trusting. It doesn't come from having all the answers, but from having faith in the one who does. Ultimately, we have to trust that God will do what God will do when the time is right for God to do what God does. God will do what God will do when the time is right for God to do what God does. And not a moment in our lives, not a moment throughout the unfolding of history and the future that comes after us, not a moment slips from his authority. He reigns over it all. I know there are times in life where it is tough. Times in life that might be so challenging, and we look around and we wonder, where is God in all this? Did he just leave me behind? Did he leave us behind? Did he lose control of things in this world? Does he not care? Back when I was in college, I don't remember exactly what was going on, but I can remember I was going through a bit of a tough time, and I was talking to a friend about it, and they told me to go and to read Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 14. And this is what Ecclesiastes 7:14 says. It says, "In the day of prosperity, be joyful, and in the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other." When times are good, we can rejoice in that. But when times are bad, we recognize that God made that time too. When I first read that, when I was, as I said, going through a tough time, I didn't really think it was very helpful. I didn't really understand what my friend was trying to get at by referring me to this verse. It took me a while to get it. And then I finally realized that what it's trying to let me know, what it's trying to let us know, is that no matter what part of your life you're in, no matter what season you're in, no matter what part of the journey you're on and how difficult that road is, God is in control. It's not like in your tough times, God has stepped back and lost control. There is something that he will do with all of it. No matter which part of my journey I'm in, God doesn't come and go. He is with us all the way. He sees us through the good times, and he sees us through the challenging times, and he can use every moment of those challenges to shape us in new ways that make us better in the long run. And he is working his plan through the good times and through the challenges. I realize that some of you may be facing some difficult challenges right now. And you may be wondering, how long? How long am I going to be in this part of my journey? When will I get some relief from that? And I just want you to know that God has not abandoned you. God is still right there with you in the challenging time. And even though we may not know how long it will last or how we'll get through it, he knows. And he is the one that will lead us through it. He is the one that knows the path. He is the one that walks by our side. And if we lean into him, we will find peace in the one who knows the way. If we can trust in him, true comfort is not found in trying to have all the answers. True comfort is found in trusting him, in having faith in his leading us. So, if our role is not to know when God is going to do something, then what is our role? What is it that we are supposed to be doing? In understanding that God's timing is perfect and every season is under his authority and not ours, what do we do? Let's look at what Jesus said to his disciples in this conversation. He told them it's not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. Really, this verse is what the book of Acts is all about. What Jesus says here, the rest of the book tells the story of how that unfolds. This is what it's all about. It's the story of how the gospel, starting in Jerusalem, goes viral. and spreads all over the place. A term that carries a little different meaning for us now these days. Maybe we understand a little bit better, but Jerusalem is the epicenter of what God is doing here in the church, and it grows into a pandemic of faith that spreads throughout the world. But look at what he says their role is in all of this. He says, "You will be my witnesses." He says, "You will be my witnesses." These people were there. These are the people that walked along the road with Jesus, that traveled town to town with him. These were the people that sat and heard the sound of his voice as he taught the Sermon on the Mount, who saw him share the fish and the loaves with thousands of people, who saw him heal the sick. These are people who witnessed these things and experienced it firsthand. And so now their role is to share that experience with the people who weren't there, to reach out to the world around them that wasn't there to see and hear and experience the things that Jesus did in person, to give them an experience of Jesus by their witness. When we think of witnesses, we often think of a courtroom, and so maybe it's helpful to think about why we have witnesses and what do witnesses do. When you have a crime that's been committed and a jury is supposed to decide if somebody is guilty or not, the jury was not there for the crime that was committed. But if there were witnesses, if there are people that were there, then they, by their experience, can bring the jury along to in some way experience it for themselves. And this is something of the role that Jesus' followers have, to be witnesses for the world. And in a sense, we carry on the same mission. We carry on the mission. We are part of the same story. We weren't there like they were, but we have our own experiences with the living Jesus. We have our own experiences in the body of Christ as fellow believers, and our mission is to share that experience, to witness to what Jesus is doing and has done in our lives. Our mission is simply to put Jesus on display by the power of the Spirit. Our mission is to simply put Jesus on display. Our mission is not to have all the answers. Our mission is not to win every argument, to be able to explain everything perfectly. Our mission is to show people what Jesus is like and to demonstrate that he reigns and what his ultimate reign brings. To help people to see Jesus, who is the King of all of creation. A little later on in Acts, Peter and John were questioned by some of the religious authorities, and they were asking them, what authority do you do these things by? And Peter, it says in Acts chapter 4, was filled with the Spirit, and he spoke to them boldly. He said some things that were probably shocking to the people that could hear, to these people who were in power at the time. And the response is this. In Acts chapter 4, verse 13, it says, "When they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished. And they recognized that they had been with Jesus." They recognized that they had been with Jesus. As an aside, it's amazing to recognize in this moment that these are the same people that abandoned Jesus when he was arrested, who were afraid for what was going on, and now they are willing to, in boldness, stand up to some of those same authorities. Something has changed here. But notice the response here of the people that hear what Peter and John say. They're astonished. They are amazed at this boldness, and they recognize that they've been with Jesus. It's almost like something is happening as they see what Peter and John are doing here, and they're like, where have I seen this kind of boldness before? Oh yeah, that guy Jesus. This is just like him. They recognize Jesus in them. So here's the question to consider as we start to wrap this up this morning. What if people said that about us? What if people saw the boldness that we have and recognized Jesus in us? Recognized that we were associated with him and were amazed by that. You know, this is not something we can accomplish on our own. To put Jesus on display is a supernatural thing. To do it genuinely, it is by the power of the Spirit. It is by the power of the Spirit. Jesus told them, it's not for you to know, but you will receive power when the Spirit comes on you. That word power is the Greek word dunamis. It's where we get the word dynamite. And so it is this understanding, this power, it's this explosive power that fuels God's people. It's this power that is infused in God's people to change the world. It is something of him inside of us that puts him on display. And this is our mission. We're going to explore over the next few weeks how this unfolds in the book of Acts. And I think we'll see that this same Spirit that works in them is working in us as well to accomplish many things today. And so may we boldly put Jesus on display. May people recognize that we have been with him. May people see in us Jesus in the way that we talk, in the way that we treat people, in the things that we post online, in the ways that we carry ourselves. And may we be his witnesses while we patiently and faithfully wait on his timing. And may we find peace in trusting him and letting go of our preferences. And may the power of the Spirit in God's people be unstoppable.